Right. Okay, welcome. It is the last day of summer. We're recording this, so we wanted to put a start point, and there we have it. Last day of summer, transition time. Transitions in our natural, if you will, world are always amazing pictures and, in a sense, metaphors, transitions in our spiritual. And God often uses those things. So it's very unique that there's lots of transitions going on in the world right now, in every mountain, in every place. Nobody saw it coming for the most part, except for those who had inklings tied to him. And in the midst of the pandemic and all that's going on in the world, one thing we do know is God is not at all upset or bothered. He is, if you will, asleep in the boat. He's not sleeping, he's just at peace. And when our hearts come in line with him, it is the best of times. When our hearts are not quite aligned with him, it feels like all heck is breaking loose, whether it's personal circumstances or being drawn into the weapons of mass distraction, as I call them, going on around us. And so here we are. And today is just to let you know, if you're listening to this in a recording, many in the community and around are participating in doing small groups or different places of watching called Loving the Prophetic. And if you watch this within the next hour or two or day or two, you could probably get in on that. But but we also knew there's some people that may not be doing that or don't even get the emails. And so there was a sense to stir our hearts to talk about what God is doing in our midst. And when I say that, I'm not talking about just a specific location. I'll reference those things, but to what he's doing in the family or what we're seeing him doing in us. And I'll lead it in this way, and I'm going to come back to where we were before we started recording, but it was just simply, I love my rabbit trails. They just go down a bush and then I can't figure out where I was. So I have to come back to the point. I'm just going to stay to the point here. There's lots of ways to hear God. And one of the ways is through the prophetic, and one of the ways is through his word, and one of the ways that basically, no matter how he speaks to us or communicates is the better word I like, the way we can hear him is so essential for us as sons and daughters. It's just, if we have an orphan-like heart, we'll tend to look at other ways to hear him because somehow our hearts are disconnected from him. But when our hearts come into a place of sonship, as we begin to walk with him, we're being transformed into the image of Christ. We are going to be able to say and do what our Father is saying and doing. And it's very interesting to me that in this transition time, so there's lots of transitions going on, lots of things being shaken. If you haven't had a chance yet, and I'm going to say this for the recording, if you haven't had a chance yet to listen to Dennis Wiedrich's message from 3 weeks ago, please do so. I felt to re-listen to it again this morning early and listen to the 10 points. And not all of them will be suited for your heart. Certain ones will hit you. And I'm hearing lots of people who have heard it, certain ones really hit them. And there's one that stands out to me right now is if you're in a place of feeling victimized, if you're in a place where you feel like everything about the circumstances is suppressing you, and it's kind of pushing you into a dark place or taking you to a space where, where's my future? Where's my birthright? How am I going to live what God has for me? I'm not talking this, if we don't get this individualistically, if you will, for our own hearts, it'll be very hard to also do it as the body, because we are being connected. So if you're in that place, I just want to encourage you that if you haven't had the chance, Dennis now has online, you can sign up for it for, what is it, Angela, do you know how many weeks it is?
For which course? Dennis has online courses.
Yeah, sorry, it's the one on
variety of weeks.
The
birthright one is on Facebook, and that one is, I think, 7 or 8 weeks, depending on the questions that come in.
And so it's a Thursday night, and there's a fee to it, but it was the first message I ever heard from Dennis on a cassette tape Don't look at me. I'm not that old. And yeah, I had 8 tracks too. But it was on the birthrights of nations and individuals. And it was just a cassette tape that went for 45 minutes, but it really altered my understanding of things. Because as we move through the journey from being kind of orphaned into sons and daughters, we also move from letting go what we think our life is about to receiving what his life is for us, why he designed us in the certain way we are, the gifts and callings we have. We get to discover, as Paul says, what it is in Christ that is for us. And as we do that individualistically, if you will, or for our own hearts, it'll start to get to the point where it starts to unfold more in corporate connections, in family connections. So learning how to hear his voice, not just from others directly, but through others, i.e. through others, that's going to be important, but also to hear directly, just because we're becoming like Christ. So Rob, all of that to get back to that statement that you've shared many times with me since we talked about that course, but do you want to share that a little bit? I think it's a really key thing for today.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. I can't take credit for the quote. I'm just repeating it, but it was a quote from a book from a guy about hearing God's voice, and he basically said, do you want to live your life vicariously through words that God has spoken to other people, or would you like him to speak words directly to you and hear him directly? So that was it. That was a little bit, because he was talking in terms of the Apostle Paul, right? All the downloads that he got out in the desert, and then he writes the majority of the New Testament, and it was like, whoa, that's like heresy. What? You're saying that I could live my life in light of what God speaks to me? Shouldn't I just read all the New Testament and do it that way? So that was a kind of a big change, or a big shift in my thinking. And then so then Dawn and I have been on a journey that started with me hearing God's voice. And then I tried to articulate what was happening to me to her, and she goes, "Oh, that's already been happening to me," in from a totally different direction. And so I was like, "Oh, that's crazy." So now we enjoy listening together and sharing what he says us, and seeing how it confirms what the other person is hearing. And often when we are thinking about things, or answering questions, or making plans, or whatever, we'll say, okay, before we go any further, let's just listen to what God has to say to us. And then we share those things together. So yeah, and that's cool. But I had such a good time at an old men's retreat with Walter Cowart, the prophetic guy who opened up the can of worms with prophecy with us, a bunch of us guys. That's why I'm really excited about the Father Heart thing that's started now, and we're going to be enjoying that today, this evening, and tomorrow evening together as a little group. If you want to hear about that, it's going to be really, because as they say, in light of this new field of love in our hearts, how that's going to affect how we hear and how we hear as a community and stuff like that. Did you want to add anything, Donna?
Question for you, Rob and Donna, would be this. Since you've learned, if you will, you took some time to allow your heart to learn how to hear, to see and hear. And Rob's one of these guys that does an incredible job at asking God, Father, a question, and then just writing it down and then passing it sometimes to the. Would you say that your relationship with God has improved dramatically by hearing him? I know it's this obvious question, but
not leading at all.
And not leading at all. It's just kind of. But my point, of course, in the question is, I know the answer, and I think everybody here does, and everybody here can hear God in different ways. But How has it affected you hearing on behalf of others or for corporateness? How does he speak to you, not from a prophetic voice from outside, but as a son inside the family?
To answer the first question, has it changed my relationship dramatically? I'd almost say it's actually started a relationship. My background came from such utter silence, and then all of a sudden to be in conversation, it was such a huge jump. For others, I think maybe for others that just grow into it naturally, it's not such a big shift, but you know what I mean? If you go from 0 miles an hour to 100, you're bound to get whiplash and everything's going to change, as opposed to going up slowly. So, and your other question was, hearing for other people. So, sometimes in the past, I would be listening for him to speak to me, and then he would kind of change my direction and say, "Oh, I have something for you to tell somebody else." And then that was a whole shift. Oh, I'm actually supposed to call this person up and tell them that I was supposed to pass something on from them to God. So that's kind of expanding a little bit too, especially when that person doesn't have a relationship with God, is not a Christian or whatever. So that's a little bit different. But it turns out, when God is giving a message to me or to Donna, or from Donna to me, or for Donna to somebody else, or me to somebody else, and it's kind of confirmed in our spirits, then it seems to be well received, because that we're just doing what he asked us to do, and the pressure's off. Really, it's not as if you're trying to give somebody advice or counsel them or think of something smart to say to fix their problem or whatever. It's just like, oh, this letter came to me, but it was really for you, so I'm just passing it on to you. And that was my job, just to readdress that to you. And what happened, that I don't have any pressure on. I have a responsibility to pass it on.
Right.
How about you, Donna?
My thanks, Rob and Donna. The reason I was asking that, and then Jodie's going to contribute something here. As we collectively listen as the body, the foot can't say, have no need of the hand. The arm can't say, I have no need of the colon. The body is connected. We can live individualistically, it feels like, and we can feel very isolated, and we can live in the world, if you will, the world noise. But when we start to live from that place, as Dennis referred to 3 weeks ago, from his perspective, he'll start sharing his secrets with us. No eye has seen, no ear has heard, if you will, all that he has in store for, let me get this right. No eye has seen, no ear has heard, and no mind has imagined what God has prepared for those who love him. Yeah. But it was to us that God revealed these things by his Spirit. For his Spirit searches out everything and shows us God's deep secrets. This is when we talk about preparing for what's ahead or getting prepared. One of the things that it's heavy in our hearts in a good way is that we all can begin to hear him as a body, not just individualistically. And this is really key. Jodie? Yes.
Yeah, I just was feeling to share something that, I've been thinking about this, how do I hear God's voice, and just this and then the corporateness of it. And I had this experience that God really, I think, just showed me, as we've become, just how do we prepare for the unknown? How do we go into these places, being prepared to hear God's voice? And then also this understanding that the desires of our heart are sometimes the very thing that he is speaking to us, and this tension of how do we know for sure that it's not me and him? like there can be all this confusion around it. And I don't know, I just wanted to share that, like, over the last month, August was it was stressful for me, and some of the decision-making stuff that we had to do surrounding kids in school and, life, where to send them, what to do about COVID related things and whatnot. And I just found myself super stressed out, and my prayers turned to, like, God, what should I do? God, should I send my kid to this school or that school? And I realized that I was, like, full on in anxious mode, even though I knew that he's got this, like, I think everybody many times, just something to be true, yet you can't check out of the emotional turmoil of it. And what was interesting to me is that the way that I was praying in that moment was like asking God for the answer. And finally, one morning, I was just, again, sitting with the Lord going, like, what is my deal? And just asking him to, like, break through. And so I felt to text a couple of people, and the wisdom God gave in the request was not like, hey, help me pray through which school I should send my kids to. It was like, help break through this anxiety, because it's not putting me in this place where I can hear or be prepared for whatever it is God wants to do. Like, I became inflexible, and then my questions were, like, coming from that, like, looking for the right or the wrong thing, the fear of, like, making the wrong choice, and all of those things just began to fill my heart, or had been for a long time. And so what was neat is I actually ended up chatting with a couple of people, and I just found that the moment that we drew together to just be together, the anxiety left, and I knew the answer. Nobody prayed into it specifically to listen on my behalf, though I think that's super valid. But it was just the state of my heart. And in the anxiety, I grew into, like, you begin asking the wrong question. I think it was God knew the answer. Sorry, I knew the answer all along. I was just too anxious to commit or to step in. But the beauty was when we gathered together, I think this is where that collectiveness comes from. It's just like suddenly, in not that long, there was this breakthrough of, sharing that in my heart, and sitting with others to just realize, that is the distraction, the anxiety, all of the other stuff is the real issue. It's not like, are you going to make the wrong choice, or, and yeah, it's incredible. And so just to tie into, as we go into the next season, the importance of walking together is I think that it's totally like a coal that's with other coals. Like, there's a heat, there's something that keeps the anxiety and the distraction and all those things at bay just by being together, because our hearts are getting more and more healed, where it's less of an internal battle to get to that place of peace. While I think we always have healing to step into, but just the drawing together almost provides like this protective shield, and it allows the fullness of who you are to hear God in the way that you're designed to hear God more and more as our hearts are healed, or whatever. And then in that place, again, saying, okay, this is what I'm sensing from the freedom of being a daughter and not dealing with all the anxiety or the noise, if you will. Katie shared a few weeks ago about the noise of opinion and the second heaven, etc. But that was just so huge, because I felt like I had just, when my head kind of gets stuck in that place, it's really hard to break through. But coming around other people, who God made you to be, and what he speaks to you, kind of, you even as you talk, you begin to go, wow, God's saying this to all of us, and the flow of what he's actually doing in our midst becomes more and more evident, which I think is so key for just creating spaces to discern together and ask God questions together, because that's how he's preparing us to step into these unknown times, unknown days. And he knows, but transition is, we kind of know generally what he's getting at, which is see his kingdom come on earth, to see love flowing out of our hearts to affecting other people. But how that's going to play out, I don't know. But I see more and more of it, like in every moment that I have these interactions with people, or am in that place where I'm not anxious and I'm not like when I am actually at rest. So yeah.
That's great. It fits with just to remind us that there are big transitions going on,
Mm-hmm.
and the transition of leaving orphanship, leaving the wilderness, if you will, and entering into promise and inheritance. God has an inheritance for us, but if our hearts are not positioned to believe we should receive it, we won't be able to get it, even if our heads want it. And so the transition in the Old Testament, as they went from Egypt into the desert, it was a 40-day journey, of course, to look at the promised land and come back. But it was interesting how the majority of the spies that went in did not have a heart, their anxiousness, their fears, the things that they carried in their own hearts, had their view of things. They saw the giants. They saw the challenges. I'm pretty sure most of us in our hearts, none of us, I don't think, on this screen have been perfectly transformed yet. I suspect in this pandemic few months, we have seen giants. We have experienced some fears that would make us want to shrink back and go back to, eating the wrong pill in the Matrix kind of deal. And yet Joshua and Caleb had a spirit about them that some of you have that spirit. Like, I want to keep going. I want to press in. I don't want to waste any more time on the face of the planet, if you will, waiting for what God's doing. And yet even in that, he's working on our hearts to be Christ-like. But the fact that their spirit, I can't even imagine what Joshua and Caleb went through for waiting another 40 years. But here's the point. The timing is in his hands, and he is drawing. He was actually in the wilderness, taking the orphanship, the individualism, the opinions, the attitudes. Again, I'm going to reference back to Dennis's message, the 10 things. And some of that is exchanging some of our wounds and our scars. That's a big one, for badges of honor. What does that look like? Well, he used an example of how many things in our past church experience, maybe some of you have been on staff at churches or been in ministry and you've gotten hurt. Doesn't matter what you were doing, whether you were a staff or you got like, man, I got scarred in the world, and it's holding us back from living in the promise. And to let that go is not something, it's not just a head decision to go, okay, I let it go. It's actually surrendering to letting his love come in and this cleaning it off. So, then we're not just listening and following Moses around to find out what's next. We're actually getting prepared to where we're being equipped to go as a body into what he has for us. And as the bride, if you will, sensitive, responsive to our bridegroom. It gets very interesting because we become kind of like we're living in the central of the Trinity. We're beginning to listen to this stuff, and collectively. And what Jodie was just sharing, Angela, do you want to just share just briefly about what God said to you in January? Because I think it is a word. It wasn't just for you, because I know you're wired. It's never just for you. It's going to be for everybody. It's really struck. So it fits with what Jodie and just Rob had said. So.
Sure. Do I have to give context, or can I just give the word?
It's up to you.
So Brant's mentioned it before, so I don't know who's heard this, but at the end of every year, Greg and I, and even when I was single, I used to just pray and ask God, like, what are you speaking for the next year? What should I know? What should I prepare for? What's just your heart for the year? And this past year, going into 2020, it was just silence. And so one day I was on a walk, and God's like, are you going to ask me why I've been so silent about this? And I was like, yeah, great question. Why are you being so silent about this? And he just spoke to me very lovingly and said, you will no longer hear individually. Like, you've reached this place of maturity where I will only release what I'm saying to you in your heart as you gather together with one another. And so this anticipation and just desire in my heart to just collectively be around other people was just there. And it wasn't that we had to get together, like Jodie said, and intentionally pray about something that I needed a decision on, but it was just more as I gathered together and just started to hear other people's hearts and I started to share mine. It was as if revelation just came naturally as we were in the presence of one another. And it wasn't a intentional prayer meeting. It wasn't a Sunday. It was just a commitment to one another in a way of, I care about getting together. So I am a massive champion now for, hey, let's just get together and talk. I don't care what we're talking about. Let's just get together and see what comes out as the river of our hearts are just shared. That.
Very cool. Mm-hmm. There's such a preparation going on in all of our hearts. And I just felt to say this. This is, I'm usually not one that stops and does this, but maybe it's just because there's an ease about today. There's a few of you that are listening to this that you've not had yet the opportunity, maybe just because of situations, to understand what is your birthright. And more importantly, in a certain way, how has it been hindered? What has the enemy got rights on? So if you haven't had a chance to do that, it's worth taking the time and tap in. You can text me later or whatever, or you can talk to Angela there, text her. But it is whatever, 6 or 7 sessions with Dennis. There's just something in my spirit that says it's very hard to go into the promised land of your heart to receive if you don't even know who you are in him and how to be cleaned of all the enemy's devices to try and steal, if you will, kill and destroy your very reason for being on the planet. And there's no shame in that. We've all been through it. I am still in the process of unpeeling things that have hindered me, but that's going to be an important thing for wherever you're at, wherever in the place of doing it. It's just great. And I think part of it leans into what Angela and Jodie and Rob have been saying here, is that to be able to hear him for you, the Spirit has to speak spirit to spirit, to know the heart of our Father, not just his ways, but his very nature is what's been put into us. And that's what gives us the ability to hear him and walk together. You'll hear, if you get a chance, if you haven't heard it yet, in Love and the Prophetic in session 2, James is sitting with Stephen Hill. Stephen Hill and his wife were hoping to move here for a few months in May. And so all pandemic hit the very day they were going to buy their tickets, if you will, in terms of and flying. So I encourage people to listen to Stephen because he's carrying so much. And then whenever the doors open, my sense is he's going to be here delivering some things into our hearts. But in that conversation in session 2, James uncharacteristically gives 4 M's. He says, usually I don't have iterations like that, where the 4 M's on how God feeds us, but they are an important thing to understand about our journey, our adventure in hearing him and walking with him. The manna, the milk, the meat, and then the mind of Christ. And the oneness that's talking about that we're beginning to start to transition into is to be aware of your own heart's journey. Is it in the milk, in the meat? Is it being, the transition is into becoming like him. Those scars and those things that we had in the past, if they're not yet healed, the enemy uses it as liens against our very birthright. To exchange that for a badge of honor is not a choice you can just make. It's something that he does, because Romans 8:28 and 29 are very true. You, whatever you're going through, God will use all things to the good. Remember, who has the plan for our life, or who has plans for our life? An egotistical God who's out in the corner? No, a loving Father. My plans, he says, I have for you are good. I don't mean for evil. When you go through stuff, some of it's the fruit of our own decisions, some of it's the fruit of our own, challenges. Some of it is just the quote, the stuff going on in the world around us, the tribulation. But his promise is this: I'll complete the work I started in you. I'll use all things to the good. Now, what is that good that Romans 8:29 says, that are called, if you will, that are being transformed into an image of Son? It's Galatians 4:1-7, that I'm at the right time in the right place. The Father knows when we're able to receive our inheritance. You may have had prophetic words. We've all had it. The local UChurch here has got, I think, probably 17 pages of prophetic words spoken over it in the last 20 some years. And you can look at some of them, and some of them on there. We also have ones for Canada, and we have ones for different cities. And I remember when we were young, we were just so excited listening to these things and going, yes, we're a part of something big, and we're part of his family in this particular region, whatever. And then how come they're not fully coming to pass? Well, we completely were oblivious, the way Safri was saying at the very beginning. We were serving, our butts off, in a sense, to go change the world. We targeted every university. I remember we had a brown paper up on a wall, and we had, there's 1.1 million students in universities in Canada, and that was our mandate. We're going to go and somehow be a part of reaching that generation. And I still think that's a seed of God in his heart. But boy, how easy it is to slip into, we're going to do this, and we're going to find out some strategies and plans. Meanwhile, he's the one that's going to do it. He's just transforming our hearts into that sons and daughters, not as an individual son and daughter living out in the bush and going, now I feel loved. But beyond that, it's not about the feeling of love. That's the beginning of cleaning off our birthright. We can step into being the body. We start to become the very body of Christ. And this is why this is such an exciting season. And this is why what we're beginning to all hear bits and pieces of, and even the fact that all of us on this screen, just a few of us, it doesn't take much, to have a few hearts start to align and life starting to bubble across each other, that where then life begins to explode out of us and flow out of us like rivers of living water. And so that was a little bit of a blab, but the part that I find fascinating is some of the letting go of the things of the past. The Isaiah 43, you're my cherished ones. You're my witnesses. This word is for today. Witness is not someone just stands up and, stands on a TV and describes what they heard from other people tell them. It's their own heart's response to what they've seen and heard. We're all witnesses. We're all capable of describing what to degree our hearts have experienced him. And if you haven't seen it by now, we're beginning to see it. Leonard touched on it last week, but oh my gosh, is the world hungry for water. They're hungry for pure living water to feed their soul, because it is just a mess out there. And so we're being transformed into being those agents. How we get there is part of the letting go of things, and part of that letting go is some of the forms and functions that may have had life flowing in them before, but they certainly are, the tsunami wave of his spirit is going through you notice how it didn't hit really hard. I mean, it hit hard for some people, but it's still happening. It's kind of like a tsunami. It's not just the wave. It just kind of keeps coming. And a little metaphor, this morning he showed me when I woke up, I spent 13 years in the corporate world, and most of my later years were spent getting ready to transition 5,000-6,000 employees to changes that they'd never been through. It was a corporation that had never laid off anybody, had never gone through any winds of change because it was protected. And now it was not. And I remember watching, very seasoned vice presidents who were making, six figures, as I had to sit with them and say, hey, this change may affect you. We don't need 9 vice presidents. We'll probably only need 5 or 6 or 7. We don't know. And all of a sudden, their little child came out, the fear in their heart. they had become friends with this world. And when you're friends with this world, you could lose your own soul if you know. And all of a sudden, I'm in these moments not to fix a company, but to actually be there and speak seeds of life into their heart. Here's this little old me. I'm not a vice president, but here I am planting seeds in there. But I remember I said, God, how do we prepare a bunch of people to go through change? Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that Dennis referred to this dream that he had before the pandemic was known as a tsunami. And it's one of the books that God got us ready for in 2013 is these moves of God through human history are like tsunamis. Once they hit, you don't go back to the old. When the tsunami of the revealing of the justification of faith through Christ 500 years ago through Martin Luther, it's never gone back. You can't find healthy Christians in the world that think, that believe that you work your way to God. It's, justification. And then it wasn't only not that long ago, 100 and some years ago, that the revealing of the Holy Spirit, a tsunami wave, a little tipping point, North America, little church of 50 people that never grew much past that, has changed, if you will, and that went through the world. You can't find anywhere in the world right now where the life is flowing that it doesn't have the Spirit in it. And then 26 years ago now was the revealing of the nature of the Father. And that happened in Canada, interesting enough, in Toronto. And so this tsunami, whatever, if this is a current tsunami of a different type of revealing or something, the 7 mountains, as Dennis calls it, how do we go through it? And God reminded me downtown 20 years ago, as I had to address, CEOs and different people, and I had to tell them the change is coming. We don't know what it looks like. We don't know how many people are going to lose their jobs. We don't know what the company is going to look like, but we do know this: change is constant. And in a secular kind of context, the fear was palpable for people who had gotten so used to the status quo. But it was just simply this: don't try and survive it. Learn how to surf it. Have fun on it. Let the wave take you, and let it wash out the stuff that needs to wash out. And this is where I'm excited when Brent Clark here describes some of the things that we see ourselves locally starting to move towards, and how it's going to be beyond people just living in Calgary. It's going to be people like you guys up in, hey, Kate and Tim up in Red Deer and different places. He's connecting a family that's growing across a nation in different places, and you guys in Moose Jaw and different places. And there's life that's going to flow. We don't fully understand all the whys, but I got a feeling he knows what he's up to way before we do. And we can't even hope or imagine all he has in store for us. And so this is this moment, I think, is what did Dennis called it? A Selah, I think it was called in the Old Testament. This pandemic is a Selah, an opportunity to pause and reflect deeply on the journey that we've taken this far. I don't know about you, but this pandemic is a big global pause. It creates lots of stresses, as Jodie was referring to, making decisions on life and jobs and kids and all that kind of stuff. But on a bigger level, especially for some of the 7 mountains, and the church is one, has gone into a global pause. You can't go back and do Sunday-centric Christianity expecting to walk in and have someone, tell you something, or have experience that God depends on worship, and then that's the only point. This life is to be lived 24/7. We are the church. We don't go to it. And he's getting us more ready, if you will, for what's ahead, the unknown. And one of our Nolly, who's a true missionary for sure, evangelist, she had a word a couple weeks ago that God had said to her, prepare for the unknown. As soon as she said it, a few of us sitting around the circle listening to that went, boom, there's some weight in this. It really had some impact. And I immediately went to my strategicness. Okay, prepare. What does that mean? Prepare. And it took a few days before God sat me down, and it was through listening to people like Jodie and some of the mamas trying to figure out how to prepare their kids for COVID school. Never been before. How does a child, whether grade 1 or kindergarten or whatever, go back with a mask and do it? Like, how do you prepare a child for the unknown? And he just showed me that parents know what their kids, they don't know all the circumstances they're going to come into. God does, of course, but you're going to end up getting prepared. And who prepares us as his children? Who prepares us for the unknown? He does. And this is why it's so cool to learn how to listen collectively.
Yeah.
Because not just one of us. Let's say I had the office of prophet and I lived in that place, and I say, "Thus saith the Lord," for Canada, for Western, for blah, blah, blah. We might be tempted, depending on how respectful I am or whatever, to just follow that. But part of the change that's going on, part of the transition that's going on, is we're all beginning to hear. We can all have a part. And that's part of the transition that we're beginning to see. And it's even happening on these calls that have been happening for these last 6 or 7 weeks, and inviting us into not having an opinion per se or an attitude about something, but to come into a place of surrender and humility, if you will, and to be able to hear him. And again, if our hearts are having a hard time doing that, let's ask him to clean off our hearts. Let's go get our birthright. What is there? Is there some blockages there? For our sake and for the body's sake. It's getting pretty exciting, because this is now a picture of what it's going to look like. One of the questions that comes up, or Jodie, you got your finger. I can tell you got.
Maybe it might just be what you're about to say. So, do you want to?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, in the context, we've heard, what's it going to look like for how we're going to meet? How are we going to gather? What's church going to look like? And I just want to clearly say, one of the things that a number of people, really sensed, and Brent just alluded to it, is be prepared for the unknown. And I just think that that's why today is so significant, of just like, what are the ways that we prepare? It's by being in a place to listen, being with others. And so I just feel like, I think we all intuitively know it's not to like look back and step into the old patterns and that sort of thing. But man, I think it's still so important that we gather. So there will be gathering, to be sure, in some way, shape, or form. But how that plays out is just going to be super exciting as we stay in this tension of like, what are you saying? And then both corporately, like not waiting for UChurch to declare, this is how we're going to do it. But like, what is God saying to each of us now? Who are we to gather with now? How do we be hospitable? How do we, like, what's God saying in the conversations with friends, with people we just met, where the Spirit's in it. And I think that the answer to the new season and what it looks like will just begin to form. I do think there's, importance for clear communication and how are we going through this transition. But I just love that God has given, I would say, like, he's really highlighting the importance of A, being together, and B, hearing him, and thus becoming healthy and whole by him healing our hearts and all of that. And so I just wanted to summarize it really particularly, because for those who may get the newsletter, it was like, come and begin to hear what God is saying to us as a family. And so I think that what I pull from this conversation, again, the Spirit kind of led where the topic was going to go. It's not like this was pre-planned, but man, I just long to be in a place where I am at rest and at peace and able to hear him and glean from others. And so, I think that's as clearly as I would attempt to articulate, what God is saying from this particular moment. I think there's going to be tons of other moments where he'll speak So that's all I wanted to say.
One of the examples that was on my heart that just really struck me was he had me go, I was reminded to go back and imagine what it was like to live in the first century, and imagine to be in that time, let's say within a month or two after the day of Pentecost. And if you can imagine, having grown up in a Jewish context and religion is all you knew, and the Pharisees, the last thing it seems to had been spoken through the prophets had been hundreds of years prior. And the last thing written down, at least that we've captured, was that Malachi word, turning the hearts of the children back to the Father and the Father to the... And let's say you've lived hundreds of years and it's just, your heart is open to God in the sense you understand the 10 Commandments. You have this sense of this is how life is. But now you're entrapped. You're in a system that you're longing to go back. You'd be longing to have the Davidic kingdom come back when everything was like it was. And that's what the disciples kept wanting. Their hope was that even when Jesus showed up, that he was going to restore what they thought was going to be the idea of a kingdom. And right now, what we're seeing shaken is the kingdoms of this world. And we're also seeing shaken is anything that the hand of man has done as it relates to, quote, church. And getting us, if you will, moving us towards a place of receiving more. This is the most incredibly unique time to live. I found myself imagining a place where there's no newspapers, no TV, no social media, back 2,000 years ago, and all you've experienced is this Galatians 4 reality that the spirit of sonship has been poured into your heart. And now you're just living from this place. There's no New Testament to read. There's no prophets or teachers or evangelists, or there's no apostles. Like the apostles were named that way. And now you're sitting around, it says in Luke 2 or Acts chapter 2, and it says they were devoted to the apostles' teachings. What did that mean? They're doing Bible studies on what they're saying? No. Those apostles were the guys that spent, basically an apostle was the ones who spent the most time with Jesus, the most time in his presence. And they were sharing what eventually we read some of that in the Gospels. Every imaginable emotion, up and down, and they are drinking it in, and life is happening. And they would meet in the temple courts. So that an outdoor kind of situation, and they would share, and you could tell people were getting enticed by it and then they're meeting home to home, and but it's not a have to. You look through history as persecution began to come, they still wanted to do it at the threat of the loss of their life and all property. They would still seek that. I have looked in my own heart, and I said, one of the things that I want you to do in this season, Father, is to help me to see that tangible desire, that longing for one another and being with, not to go find a Sunday and sit in a chair and listen to someone tell me, but to be connected with one another, to have the life of God flowing through, to receive from each of us what is in it, you that he has for all of us. For us, that to me is becoming a greater and greater longing and desire. And how it's starting to shape up is I felt God say, take this baby step. Angela used that term in writing back to me on something, and it was just as clear as a bell. And for those who have gotten the other emails, was, hey, why don't we lay at the feet of the office of the prophet, in the sense, which is James, Jordan, and there's Denise in there, and Stephen, and take this love and the prophetic, and knowing we could actually hang out with people. If you feel comfortable, you can have cohorts. My wife and I were talking about last night. You can have up to 50 people in your home if you wanted, but you'd have to have the space. But the reality is, you can, wherever you feel comfortable with, you could actually do that. And you could actually not just listen to a a message for 30, 40 minutes. You could actually drink it in and take some time. And I just could imagine it. And unfortunately, my wife and I can't do that because our daughter's immune system is now rebuilding from a baby stage. And we have to, even if COVID didn't exist, we wouldn't be able to meet with anybody in a close proximity. But I just thought, man, this is a neat baby step. This is an invitation for people to, if they hear, to be able to take a step, and where that's going to lead, how that's going to be normalized for some people in a sense, will be in your heart, either being drawn in or being the drawers of people in. But there's going to be a place where we talked about, where now we can hear more collectively and together. And corporate gatherings, like a larger thing, it's going to happen, but it's not going to look like it used to. And here's one of the words for some of you that are in other parts of the nation or in other places. I've been getting some emails from people from the West Coast and down San Diego way. And they listen to Dennis, and they've taken one of the words is Saul's house and David's house, and the story of Jonathan. And what happens if we choose to stay connected to the old things, the old ways and the old forms and the old, perhaps systems? Is the possibility could exist that we don't get to travel as quickly into the promises that he has for us. It's not as Dennis shared it wasn't a scary kind of a fear thing. It just reminded me how children are actually, our hearts are longing for adventure. Our fear part are longing for clarity and security. But our childlike heart is open to learn. It's open for expression. It's open to let life come through us. And I don't have much. There was no intention today to kind of deliver anything that had a sense, here's 5 points to go run with them, but to remind us and encourage us that what he's been saying to us, especially if you go back and listen to the 7 weeks of what has been said, all these different giftings from different parts of the body, all having seen through the lens of sonship and describing those parts and pieces, is encouraging us, we can learn and continue to learn how to hear and be with him as sons and daughters, and in hearing from him, and recognize that what he's really after in us, the whole point of Christianity, is that we're being conformed into the image of the Son. What does that mean? We're being transformed by unbecoming everything that's not really us. Safri, as you were sharing, at that young age, and your whatever shaped your heart to be that performance, that shame culture and all that kind of stuff that we've talked about before. And yet you're still you in the midst of that. And he's peeling away all of those things where now love is coming, and your heart is now going to be and continue living from a place of sonship. And you're now going to be doing what he's doing, where before we might have done things that we thought we were supposed to do. Dennis said something 3 weeks ago that was really powerful. All of us have created Ishmaels. All of us have, in our orphanship, likely created things that had no, not the life of God in it, but we were trying to do what we thought was right. And when he talked about in Hebrews the foundations of Christianity, the core doctrines, if you will, and the first one is repentance from dead works in Hebrews. And he says, it doesn't say repentance from sin, it says repentance from dead works. And I was like, I can think of, in the corporate world, I could think of 1,000 projects that we'd start and they would die. And that's, the orphan world just constantly has to work on trying to create new things and learn from the death. But in the church, oh my gosh, we put so much effort and time into creating things, forms and functions that don't carry life. The structure, the wineskin as a structure doesn't carry your life, but your heart does. And so by repenting, by going, Father, is there anything that I've been thinking or doing or have an allegiance to in terms of form and function that I'm really longing for, I would ask him to show you what that really is about. Because there is a place where he's leading us into this unknown, into this place by preparing us to be free. Even when they crossed into the promised land, into the beginnings of inheriting their promises, receiving them, and their inheritance, they still then had to work together to clear out the giants. The milk and the honey was there, instead of what, the spies had seen 40 years earlier. Just the giants. We saw ourselves as little small grasshoppers. Well, that's the birthright. They didn't know who they were. They didn't know themselves as the children of God, other than their external circumstances. We're starting to live from the inside out, from a heart that is being transformed, from a place that we need one another, not because we're in need, but because more life will flow to and through us to one another. And I'm excited about it. I'm a little intimidated by it all, because it's going to require a little bit more patience as we listen to how do we incorporate things like this technology? How do we advance, if you will? How do we collectively listen to taking the Jerichos, to each season, each step has a listening part. You just don't take a principle and go after it. And I'm very conscious that there are some people that are at the milk stage or at the meat stage, or maybe there's some that have come to faith in the last little while that are part of the external parts of our community, and they're going through the manna stage. But the neat thing is we don't control the rate of growth around people. We plant and water. God, through us, plants and waters seeds, and then he does the increase. I love the fact that we're all being watered. And in going forward, I think there's going to be a lot more questions that come out and interactions and things. But the last few calls that we've had with Dennis and Leonard, they went 3 hours in general, 2.5 hours. And a good portion of people would stay on, and just the questions were coming, and it just shows how hungry our hearts are and thirsty we are. So careful, caution, don't let the weapons of mass distraction, all the stuff that's going on, steal away this unique moment. The transition is not just an overnight. It's a continuum that's going to be happening in our midst. So, we had originally said when we set this going that we would try and keep it to an hour, and we're at an hour and 15-ish from official start. But I want to honor that time, and sorry, I'm watching the McNeils. I'm watching how I get to see all your kitchen and your kid. That was great. And I saw Adrian, I think it was. I lost my train of thought. When little children's faces who are full of joy, just,
a computer screen, so sorry, here's a little distraction. But I was laundry while I listened to you. I really was listening, Brent.
Oh, seriously. We'll close with this, and we're going to close in 5 minutes. We're going to give you 5 minutes. I just want to hear just some one-liners from you, or does this fit? What does it? Is this an amen to you? Is this? Is there any kind of burning question? We probably won't respond to it here, but if you have one, you can put it in the chat or text it, because it's going to be important to hear what's going on in your hearts, because whether you know it or not, you're representing a good portion of the body, the family of God, that are in this transition. And
I see you asked Rowena first to prove that she was listening.
Yeah, what did you hear, Rowena? No.
At that point, I was actually talking to my daughter about whether she washed her hair before a walk or after. So, Sorry.
Life decisions.
This is distracted family church time.
Yes. So, does anyone, by show of hands, have a question or comment about what you're hearing? Not an opinion, but just what's your heart being stirred in right now as it relates to this? Are you excited about the future? Are you intimidated by it? Are you confused by it? How would you describe your heart's responses right now? Anyone, you can put up your hand and I don't know how it works, Angela. They have to put up their hand and you unmute them. Okay. Rowena's got her hand up. Yay.
Yeah. Just wave at me. And I can unmute. Or you can actually push the button that says raise hand, which helps me a lot more because then it pings who wants to raise it. And that helps too. So I'll just unmute you after the Rowena's done.
Go, Ro.
Brilliant. Well, it's just kind of neat. I just enjoyed hearing this morning what God had been speaking to all of you, and obviously from the sounds of things in staff meetings or various gatherings that I wasn't a part of, because it's just really neat because it really was the same thing that we have been hearing. Like, I think through COVID and through everything just being very different, and it was just really neat. Like, it seemed like in the slowing down of things, God's voice, it was always there and it was always clear, but it just allowed more space for it, right? And so, yeah, it's just been really neat, like hearing Father just really like audibly speaking to me in the way that he speaks when it's like a prophetic word for someone else. Like when you're in that place where you're like believing God to hear for someone else and he speaks to you clearly and you know it's him and you have confidence to share because you knew it was Father speaking to you. It's like in that way he's been speaking but just in a personal way. And so it's just really neat to hear like that's what he's been speaking to you guys. And just I just think that this season is a real, not all parts of it is a gift. Like, I'm not just trying to say it's all easy for everyone. It hasn't been, but there's been a gift in the midst of it, of like a space to be able to hear God in a really unique way. So yeah, it was just really encouraging hearing you guys this morning. So thank you.
Cool. Neat.
All right. Next up, Elderberry Brent Clark. I'm just trying to find fun ways to name our elders. Elderberry, Eldersome.
Yeah, I'm really excited. We had met a while ago, and a bunch of us gathered to pray about what was God saying for the future. And you know what I'm really excited about this morning, Brant, is a lot of what he laid on our hearts then and spoke to us then just happened this morning. Mm. Once again, he's already out in front of us doing the things that we want to try to figure out how to do, and we don't need to. You're absolutely right. What is this all about? This is 1 Peter 2:9. We're a chosen people. We're learning to be chosen people, sons and daughters. We're learning to be a holy priesthood. You know, we're learning how to be royal. We're learning how to be the people of God. We're learning how to be a holy nation. And what does it look like? How does that make Sunday look? It looks exactly like what just happened. 1 Corinthians 14, which was the word that I got that night. Everybody comes with something. We all have a piece of this together. And it's the together part, which you stressed this morning, which is really critical. Jodie said it. Angela said it. It's true. It happens when we gather, whether that's physically or over Zoom or a combination of both. This is how it's happening. And the way that our time together went this morning is what it's supposed to look like. It's not an event. It's not a service. It's the family of God getting together and people sharing what's on their heart. This is what it looks like. We just did it. And I am super excited about that because I love this. There's life in it. It's all of us collectively together sharing what we're hearing. So, yeah, I'm excited. I'll leave it at that.
I like you excited.
Well, unless I get too excited, then it gets really crazy.
All right, next up, board member extraordinaire, Rob Stovey. I'm doing this so people know who these people are that are talking and if they are relevant to things that you wouldn't normally know that they do at UChurch.
Actually, it's not Rob, it's me.
Oh, it's Donna, even better. Not that you're not great, Rob, but I love when Donna's here.
The better half.
Yeah. I just really feel Father speaking to us in such intimate ways. And this is a gathering and we're in community. And this is wonderful on a Sunday. It's wonderful any day of the week. And I do miss being with people, but in this season, Aaron, if it's okay if I use our example, I have spent more time with Aaron online, like sending messages, than I did when she was in Calgary. And Father's doing amazing things. Like, you know, I'll wake up in the middle of the night and think, I just feel like I have Aaron on my heart and I need to pray. And I'll text her and I'll send her something and she'll say, oh, that's exactly, you know, picture that I had. Or so I think this season's a very exciting time. Yes, I miss seeing people and being in the same room with people, don't get me wrong, but he is up to something, and whatever he puts in front of us is where I want to go. And I think today's just been a beautiful example. And I look down at my journal, and on the front of it, it says, there are better things ahead than anything we leave behind. C.S. Lewis quote. So that's just a real, I don't know, confirmation for me.
That's cool.
Awesome. I think Sek, how do you say it? I'm going to ask him to unmute. He keeps trying to unmute himself.
Cece.
So I'm trying to take a visual cue here.
Okay, yeah, I'm Cease, and for those of you who don't know us, this is my wife, Sue. Just a tiny bit about where I'm at in the journey with getting to know Father better. Nearly all the time when I sense the closeness, at this point in my life, it's an overwhelming thing, which I'm one of these men who cries, brings me to tears most of the time. But what I wanted to say about future and church and gathering and all, I'm convinced that we are going to highly value the things that Father does a lot more, and the things that are less important, like whatever they are, our own agendas, our things that didn't give life. It's going to be so obvious that many of those things are going to drop off naturally as we focus on and appreciate and love and feed the things that are life-giving, the things that are what the Father's saying to each of us and through others to us. And yeah.
Cool. Thanks for sharing.
That's great.
Safri, hold on, let me come find you. All right. I just asked you to unmute. There you go.
Yeah. Thank you. The COVID seems to coincide with the timing for my concussion, the concussion that I had. And it's been quite a journey the last 4 months, doing things I never thought I would. Father speaking clearly, giving me specific words to do what seems crazy. Some people have told me it sounds like you've lost your mind. I guess it's like, but Father's leading. And just this past week, I know I'm like, okay, what's my next step? And I realized that I was in fear. And I'm like tense. Do I go get therapy in Austin? Do I stay in Durham to get therapy for the concussion? And I was just tense. And as I was walking with Father, as I usually do around my lake, I call it, he gave me a word. He said, you shall go out with joy and be led forth in peace. And with that word, it's like, it doesn't matter what I do. He didn't answer whether I go to Austin or I stay in Durham, but it's joy and peace. And, so it resounds with what you all are saying. The unknown, I don't know whether I'm going to go to Austin, but I know one thing. I'm going to be full of his joy and be led by peace. And yeah, and so it's a new journey of the unknown. It's an interesting journey that we can have full of joy, just in his presence, because he knows. He's the one who knows.
Awesome. Thanks, Safri. And Caroline.
Hi. I just feel really full from today's church, and Brent, I've really enjoyed, and that's not really the right word, but this whole session has, once again, you have a way of speaking to me and to us corporately that I really value. And now I could not come to the physical Calgary UChurch because of where I live. And I feel the COVID blessing for me in this is I'm feeling a member of UChurch, and I will text you later. I want to just text you quickly about something, and I really want you to know that I value you and all that you're doing, and the church members of putting this out so that it doesn't just have to be in a physical building. So bless you and the whole team. Thank you.
Oh, on behalf of everybody who is part of the family here, you're more than welcome. I think it's been the transition he's been taking us through in a very unique way. And if you want to become a member of UChurch, you just have to give us your firstborn.
Not true. No, we have to edit that out of the podcast.
I don't mean to. I like having fun with that. No, as you all know, I hope when we use the term, it's funny how God had us change the name of the church many years ago from University Christian Church, because it met on the campus and it did for 20 years, to UChurch, short for. But it was so funny because it's just, you're the church. You are the church. You are the family, and he doesn't ever refer to us in his heart as anything less than his children. And we may not interact with him initially like that, so then he'll come to our hearts and deal with us in that way. But as orphans are coming home to the Father type of thing, we think are slaves in service. But man, oh man, oh man, there's nothing better than to be able to, for your heart to realize you're worthy of belonging and you're worthy of love. And when that sinks deep into the hearts of a number of people, my gosh, it doesn't matter where we've come from, what we've done, where we're at, where we live. None of that matters. The kingdom starts to take root. And all those, like we were years ago, perhaps wondering about all that stuff, there's all those people out there that are going to be drawn into your sphere, into your lives. And part of me gets excited about part of me gets, anyway, I'm going to shut up now because you got me, Carolyn. That one went straight in. That was good. Any other, any hands that went up? There was a question. Did you send me a question, Angela, from someone on my text?
Sure did. I didn't see any more waving hands, but the question is, this is for you and Jodie. Brief and amazingly, could you answer, when Brant said old ways of doing things? Was it more of the structure of the church and how things are done? Question mark. From an Elderberry.
This answers it in the sense of a picture that God gave, that I saw just about UChurch and the structures or the ways or whatever you want to call it. As I saw UChurch was in this picture, a building that was built, not the place that we met, but it had structure. It had rooms and functions, and people knew where the entrances and the exits were. And over the past few years, God just has shown me that structure was really a support for a big giant, like this beanstalk plant, that, how plants will have like scaffolding, if you will, around them, or a structure to hold them up when they're weak. And I just saw that the structure of UChurch and what it was really that, for this like shoot or this plant that was growing up. And that where we're at now is over the past couple of years, there's been that plant, like a big beanstalk, has gotten so, like, it's growing and healthy that it's actually breaking apart some of the scaffolding and the structures. And it was always intended for this purpose, like just some of those ways that we related, it was to like bring people together, to see life, to be the church. And so some of the structures and the things that we did, or the ways we related, were so significant in that season and then in that time, because it allowed for what God was doing to grow and be healthy and strong. Of course, not without its issues, because we're all people and we live in a broken place, but his spirit was just flowing in that. And I love the fact that he's led us through this undoing of the old, which, I could probably list what a number of those things were, or even some of the process. But ultimately, I just see this big, healthy beanstalk kind of thing just growing, and that was what was always intended. And so life is indeed flowing, and it's meant to be, like I think you just said it, and I love that it's just without these boundaries that we used to think of, just because of circumstance and how we lived and what the expectations have been for years. And so, to be a church in the city and the nation, all God's kids, I love it. And so I don't know if that answers the question, but it's definitely something that I just can't even look to the past and think anything was bad or poor or terrible or causing life to stop. It was all just a beautiful part of our history to bring us to this place where we are now, in conjunction with, just the time that we live in. So, yeah.
I'm known for very short answers, so
Really?
Yeah. There's an untruth right there. But the short answer would be the old ways of doing things. That's just such a big pie, and the response would be, I'll share it this way. It will appear like it's structures and doing things, but what's really going on is life is growing the way Jodie's referring to it. That is creating different ways, and so life always has some structure to it. Our bodies we have skin and bones, but we know that the tent, the scriptures calls this, is going to pass away, but the life is in the spirit. And so structures come and go, systems, if you will. We're online right now because a whole bunch of smart kids went to university and designed computers and created a thing called Zoom calls and all that kind of stuff. And but they're not the point. They just happen to be a conduit that can allow life. And so many of those things, we could talk about some of those things, some of those ways in which we're connecting, some of the ways in which life is flowing are shifting. But for me, I write it just simply as this. We have been on this journey and definitely during the pandemic, asking the question, where does life flow? Where are you showing your life? And Brent keeps referring to it positively, like we've been doing these breakout groups and certain ways. But it's been amazing Like, I've learned more about people in this format over these 6 months than I would have if everybody was able to come to the same church on a Sunday and hang out for 2 hours. You just wouldn't have gotten to what you were talking about, Donna, your conversation with Aaron, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's life happening in ways because of a change and a shift that we didn't plan for, we didn't create, we didn't say, let's get rid of Sundays. It's just the circumstances had us now to seek him. And that's what pressure does. We go back and say, what are you doing? And where does life flow? And so we start to realize, well, life is always flowing heart to heart. And how do we connect that? Do we come up with a plan, or does he show us and we just start going down that path? And so that's why some things may even look similar to the past in months that going ahead, but what's changing is the life is now the focal point. As a community here, God took us down a place of repenting to where we had put in our faith in structure. We didn't know we'd, in a sense, done it, but we had started to put our faith, if you will, put our hope, if you will, in he'd show up on a Sunday, or he'd show up at worship time, or he would do this or do that.
Not only that, Brent, we would relate through structure.
And we would relate, yeah. We would, people would come together, let's say, given for our sake, on a Sunday, we'd come together and we have this kind of general greeting time, and then we have this big tic-tac time, we'd call it, and many of you know, and you can connect with a few people, but you wouldn't have the depth that's going on, and it became kind of habitual. We would put a lot of effort or trying to figure out how to do that better and more concise, or whichever. And what about kids now? Because UChurch used to be all students, and now there's this baby boom going on with all these babies running around, and that's still, quite honestly, it's one of the questions that lays out there. You don't see many families online here, just because doing life at home and trying to do this, it just gets kind of crazy. So this isn't going to be the only way, but all of a sudden he's been showing us, quite frankly, let go of putting your hope in the structures, and there's other wells. And guess what? The biggest well is you. Out of the innermost being come rivers of not just water, living water. And this is why what he's up to is transforming us. And when you get a few of us together in different places, like Donna, I always tell people when it's going to be okay to hug and not freak someone out by hugging them, mine are going to be really weird because I'm going to hold on for a while. and it'll be like, oh my gosh, I missed this. And it didn't get taken away forever. We're just going through this incredible, unique season of learning what is really where life is flowing. And I'm looking forward to what he's going to reveal to us, and how the fivefold giftings that are in place in the body of Christ are going to be helping us to mature into the unity that it says in Ephesians 4. And I found that kind of interesting, that over the last, say, 7 weeks, we've had the privilege of having people that as a local gathering, we would never have been able to fly everybody in for one, if they landed, we'd have them we'd want to do more things with them, but just a Sunday, you'd have maybe a 45-minute message. But as we've seen with Dennis and Matt Dank and Katie Wiedrick and et cetera, some of these things have gone 2.5, 3 hours. And the interaction of it, well, that wasn't on the screen. And so it's not so much, getting rid of the old as it is starting to embrace the new, just where the life is flowing. And we just don't want to enshrine anything and somehow put it up as the point. So I know that's a short, long answer. Ha, ha, ha. But whoever sent that, I think I know who you are, but it'd be fun to have a conversation, because usually the biggest question that I had at the beginning of this a couple of years ago, if we let go of certain things, does it sound disrespectful? Is it going to hurt? Is it going to stop life flowing? Like, it just had all the questions. And how do we get taught? How do we receive? How do we grow if we don't do what we used to do? And so those are fantastic questions. It's not like, we're just throwing everything to the wind, and there's wisdom that he's giving to us as we move forward through it. But this, again, is hearing people, because just as many, people there's going to be ideas and creative ways in which life is going to flow. So, yeah. Anyway,
something.
You got your finger up. You're muted, though.
You can't unmute.
Oh, that's an Arlene. Hold on.
There you go.
So I just want to share one brief observation about this format. And what occurs to me is that we are body, soul, and spirit, or spirit, soul, and body, human spirit. And I think what's happening here in this format is that we are actually better able to communicate and connect spirit to spirit, rather than in the other forms of being, bodies connecting in a bodily way or connecting in a soulish way. So I see that as a distinctive. And, when we talk about heart, we're talking about the essence, the very essence. And I think that equates to human spirit. So, we can interact more on that kind of an observation going forward. But that's where I think God is taking us. And I think he's very pleased with the way this is going. That's all.
It's always good that he's pleased. I have a question for someone here. Rico, I see your name on here, and we haven't talked for a long time, but you may be muted or whatever. But you're always, whenever I ask you a question, what I hear come back to you is literally what God's doing. It's really powerful. So I see you unmuted. So what are you hearing, my friend?
Oh, just mute. Wait.
Oh, we can hear you. It's just speak up.
Oh, we can do so. Sorry, PB. And we're just listening right now, and we're just continuously, opening our ears to hear from him. But this past few weeks, we are okay. We are, we are okay. Thank you.
Just share them about the child heart that God is pouring out into our hearts.
Come here. It's okay. Come here.
I love
Eileen wants to share something, PB, and that.
Yeah, PB, hello everyone. Rico and I were just, meditating on it. Like, I know we've been talking about, having a child heart, but this past few weeks, we've been talking about it, like, how, it's liberating. I mean, I read one of your email that, when you know the love of the Father, it's really a liberating experience. It's like being a child again. It's like you don't have to worry about, what other people will say. You just go worship God, talk to him every day, just like a father. So it's really a liberating experience for us.
Well, unless there's some more hands that go up, I love the fact that we said, oh, we're going to keep this an hour, our plan. And as Brent said, we don't get to Trump. We let him trump our plan. I do have this sense, just to leave you with this. I know a lot of you haven't had a chance to share, or maybe you're just more quiet online or whichever. But if you have anything in your heart that you feel is being agitated, or you have questions for, or you would like to talk about or discuss or just work that through. And sometimes this is a bit intimidating for people, for sure, can be. I would just encourage you to send an email. And if you want to send it to me or someone on the screen or whoever that you might know. But this is going to be important to not to forget what God told us over a year and a half ago. And I'm going back, I'll go back 5 years and put it all together, but just a year and a half ago when we started to see a disturbance in the force, if you will, in the old ways. And it was starting to affect us in the community, and people were reacting to it. And I asked God, what do we say? What do you want to say? And he had me, I'll give it to you, write it out. And I tried, I couldn't make it come. And he said, I didn't say I'd give it to you in advance. I said, I'll give it to you bit by bit. And so the first one was just simply, if people want to know what I'm doing in my church, and this is important for those of us who have questions about whether it's locally or in general, it's going to be important. He said, have them turn to the person on the left to their right and have them ask them, what am I doing, God, what am I doing in their hearts? And depending on how their openness to answering is, what I'm doing in their heart is what I'm doing in my church. Because my church is not an organizational structure. It is my people. It's my family. And yes, does it have some structure to it? Yes. Just like any family that gets together, but they're not defined by their structure, and they're not defined by the scheduled times in which they eat or have their cultural things that they do. It's defined by the amount of life and love that's flowing in and to from their hearts. And so we often, when we say what God do in his church, we're often asking what's about the structure. But the reality, what he's asking us is to not fixate on that as much as he's asking to fixate, if you will, or focus on what am I doing in each other's hearts. You see, this is how he writes us on each other's hearts. When I got to meet CC and Sue in a garage out in Cochrane, and we got to ask what's going on in your life. And you were so open that I feel like you're written on my hearts. Same with Aggie and Lynn, we spent 4.5 hours online one day, chatting, and you're written in my heart. And it's amazing how when we do that, even our desire to get to a clinical answer, the mere effort, the mere process of asking one another and going there will do more in the changing of our heart often than getting the right answer or an answer that we apply. And so it doesn't mean we don't have the questions. The disciples had lots of questions. And often Jesus, 60-70% of the time, they say he answered the question with a question. And I find that's quite fascinating because, someone said it earlier, he's drawing the truth out of us. It's already in us. And we're just, the body's drawing it out of us. So anyway, it's a lot of fun. So we're going to end it like that because knowing myself, I just keep on going. But we will leave it like that. If you have any questions or emails, or please let us know. Let me know. By the way, that Love in the Prophetic is still available if you would like to get a group together or whatever, because they're all recorded. They're 5 sessions, about 65 minutes long, and so you could watch those with some other people. Amazing. My wife and I are going to watch 2 tonight, and then also on our website, Angela, I think we'll have the link up there for Dennis Wiedrich's course, and so you can actually do that, and you can also watch that with people. The Birthright. I'm kind of drawn to want to hear it again because I only heard a 45-minute, and it changed me. So I don't know what's going to be like, but knowing Dennis, it's going to be amazing because it'll be interactive and don't never be bashful. If there's something in your heart that you're going, my wife said, I think I've heard some of I think I'm expecting to hear some similar things that I've heard before on the prophetic. And I said, I think, yeah, but your heart, but revelation is never going to not flow if your hearts are open to hearing, especially from people, especially when you hear from what I'm hearing from all of them. But what came out of Stephen Hill for me, I've been with him physically 3 or 4 times, and it was incredibly amazing. It's a reframing of how, for some people, how getting an understanding of the prophetic through the lens of sonship, receiving and giving of it. So anyway, I'm babbling now. It sounds like I'm advertising, so just want to encourage you. Bless you, everybody.